Good afternoon. I'm Ozzy Cullen, Event Coordinator at the Vegas Chamber. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to our Conference and Events Industry Insights to a Changing World webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to explain some features of this call. In order to preserve high sound quality, we will be muting everyone on the call besides our presenters to make it easier for everyone to hear. If you are joining this call on the web or through the mobile app, you can ask a question by using the chat feature on the interface. We will ask your question on your behalf. In order to preserve time, we ask that you please keep questions brief, and we will be taking all questions at the end of the call. And now, please welcome our moderator, the Vegas Chamber's Vice President of Membership Development, Will Ochoa.
Thank you, Ozzy, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we appreciate your patience as we work through some technical difficulties. Just as a heads up, we do have 3 panelists. One of them is joining us over the phone, but we'll get to that in a second. We've been working really hard here at the Chamber to make sure that we're providing the most up-to-date information for all of you. It's our priority to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information as you navigate all the rules and recommendations for reopening and above. Today's webinar is informational in nature only, and we strongly advise you stay up to date with the newest guidelines set by the government, which you can find on our website at vegaschamber.com on the COVID-19 page. We have quite a large crowd. We had over 500 people RSVP, which is exciting. And a lot of the businesses that will be joining us today are non-members. Just so you're aware, for everyone on the call, we do have a free membership program going on right now through June 30th. The information is in the chat box in the form of a link. If you could please share that information. If you are not a chamber member, please click on that information and find out more on how to join the chamber. Lastly, before we begin, tomorrow we are concluding our series of the Going Back to Work with Matter Real Estate. Tomorrow, the webinar is entitled Your Brain on COVID, How Fear Will Prevent Your People from Their Best Work. The panelists will feature Phil Dixon, who is the founder and CEO of the Oxford Brain Institute, and Tom Reiger, the president and CEO from the National Business Innovations, and is moderated by Jim Stewart, who is the founding partner of Matter Real Estate. For more information on that webinar, you also will be getting that in the form of a link in the chat box. Now, before I begin and introduce our panelists, I want to make sure that you all have a chance to ask your questions. On your interface with GoToWebinar, you'll see the portion where you can ask questions. Please feel free to ask questions as they come up, because what you'll find is that you'll have the question pop up. Please ask it right away, and that's your best way of getting your question answered. We'll do our best to get to everyone's questions at the very end of it. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce these speakers as they give their perspectives on the changing world of events amid COVID. We'll start with Tim Glanzer. Tim is the CEO of Elevated Meeting Solutions. He started his career in banking and then quickly moved over to hospitality and has been there ever since and has over 30 years of experience in the industry. He's also been a certified meeting planner since 2000. Tim, thank you so much for being on the call today.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
Of course. Next is Debbie Felker. She's the Vice President of Sales for Destinations by Design. Her main focus is planning and directing sales activities within the organization, as well as overseeing the sales and marketing team. Debbie has had a 16-year career at Destinations by Design, DVD for short, and has received numerous accolades and certifications during her career. Debbie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And lastly, Lenny Tellerico. He's the Director of Corporate Sales for Blueprint Studios in Las Vegas. Lenny is regarded for his contribution to many iconic Las Vegas offerings throughout his career. During his tenure with MGM, he produced high-profile international events, including grand openings, entertainment launches, and industry meetings, many of which have been recognized with multiple eSpirit and Gala Awards. Lenny, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And if anybody wants to see what Lenny looks like, just look him up on LinkedIn. It's a great picture of him. So thank you to our experts and for all of you to be here today. What's nice is all 3 of you are chamber members, so thank you for being members of our chamber. So let's start the Q&A session. We'll start with you, Debbie. How do we start to safeguard basic office meetings?
That's a great question, and I know for a lot of us, we're ready to get back together in a room to be able to meet face to face. there's elements to be considered and to be implemented right away, and those are guidelines and protocols, communication, and flexibility. And starting with guidelines and protocols in line with your own organization and office guidelines moving forward, and allowing people back into your building and what that looks like, so that we can safeguard health and safety first. And once those guidelines are established and protocols are put into place, and what your new capacity looks like in your meeting spaces, in your group rooms, boardrooms, or huddles, and how you're going to implement your own social distancing guidelines in place, your procedures on whether doors are open, hand sanitizers are in place, and things like that are clearly established, they need to then be communicated and widely understood. And the flexibility piece comes into still allowing meetings to happen virtually for people to be able to call in if they're not able to come in, not comfortable to come in to the office, and also to allow more people to be able to meet. You need to have 20 or 30 people meet, but you don't have a space to be able to do that in under proper protocol. So being able to allow some flexibility in what that looks like going forward.
That's great. And I believe that's the phase that we're currently in terms of small office gatherings. The guidelines currently say that there's about 10 individuals per room. So thank you so much. Tim, as a certified meeting planner, with the amount of experience you have, this is an unprecedented time. I know it's very cliche to say, but what critical information should the venue and planner know going forward?
Simple answer, everything. And we laugh at that, but I think we really are going to have to go back to the beginning and really understand what the guidelines and the protocols are. And currently we don't. We don't clearly have a plan of understanding what that is. So I think we need to, first of all, not take anything for granted, not assume anything. And that is not only on the side of the planner side, but also not have any preconceived expectations on how the venue is going to handle things. We need to see things in writing. We need to have discussions and reviews. And we really need to, in my opinion, start from scratch once we come through the other side and start planning these events. Clearly, we need to understand what we can and can't do. In the new norm, what is the protocol? What's the process? And I also believe that every venue may be different. I mean, we'll have state guidelines and federal guidelines, but I think we still need to, when we go to Las Vegas or Orlando or New York or California, wherever we go, we're going to need to ask, okay, what are the processes here, and not assume that what's happening in Las Vegas is going to be the protocol for Orlando. So, I'm a big supporter of communicating and over communicating and understanding exactly where we are, and then not only between the venue and the planner, but also your teams, your stakeholders, and just as important, your attendees. They need to understand, and we need to communicate in advance before they ever arrive through registration and communication what they should expect upon arrival, and how that's going to work, and how that has changed since COVID-19 came into our world in this unique time that we live in. So I think that is a true understanding of just really clear communication in every area.
Yeah, you mentioned yesterday in our call, and even today, how education of the attendee is extremely important. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, it isn't, it was before COVID, and it is going to be just as important, if not way more important now, because you want to give the expectation and the understanding to the attendee before they ever arrive what the protocol is and how the event's going to be procured and translated. So that would be 10 times what it will pass, in my opinion. Again, because there's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be anxiety in the beginning as people to attend events, especially the first 6-7 months of this as we go into it. We'll need to communicate what the expectations are. We'll need to communicate the protocols. We'll need to communicate that when you enter the facility and go into the convention area and how all the events will be communicated in the sets and everything, how it's going to work. The worst thing would be for them to show up and not have any understanding, and then it's a live understanding. That never works well. We've seen that, unfortunately, throughout our history of doing events, that doesn't work well. So as much information as we can give them and set them up for success and calm them so that when they do attend the event, they do understand what to expect before they ever arrive.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And that's a really good point in terms of calming. And we'll get to that later. Lenny, this one's for you. And yesterday, I wish you're on camera so you could still do the fortune teller maneuver. But what does a new normal look like, and what can we expect in the short and long term?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that there's any of us that are out there that can really predict exactly what the new normal is going to look like. I think that we're realizing on a daily basis that that continues to evolve and it continues to change as we learn more about the virus, as we learn more about how it is transmitted, and what we need to do to best protect ourselves, our employees, and ultimately, you know, the attendee that's going on. I think if anything, we would all be in agreement that there's a heightened awareness now with regard to public health, with regard to cleaning and sanitation, which are completely different things, but we're all learning about that as well. But everyone's learning to mitigate in whatever arena that they're working in. How do we best do that? So when we're looking at hospitality in particular, it's the new normal is going to be a far cry from large gatherings that we've seen, at least in the short term, and potentially for an extended period of time, is that people will have to say, we still need to go out of our homes, we still need to participate. How do we participate in a manner where we feel comfortable? And us as providers, how are we ensuring that guests feel comfortable? There's that perception that the moment that they walk into a location, whether that be a restaurant, whether it be an expo hall, or whether it be a hotel, is there a perceived sense of safety here? So are we demonstrating to those customers that we have taken the necessary steps to ensure their safety and well-being, as well as those who are working for us? So I think that is what we're going to be looking at in the immediacy, is how do we demonstrate confidence to those attendees or to any of those clients that are coming into an establishment by way of practices we put in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Lenny, just a follow up to that, in terms of the new normal in the short term, do you think that there should be a temporary separate capacity for health to allow for social distancing? And how does this affect large gatherings for food and beverage moving forward?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing that in our daily lives already, with regard to social distancing, with regard to delineation on the lines. You're allowed to stand here. You need to keep your distance from people. So I believe that that's 100% going to have to translate into hospitality as we begin to reopen restaurants, convention centers, expos, meeting rooms. I think looking at that and taking the advice from those healthcare professionals who are out there that are beginning to say, okay, what's that formula look like? Once again, so that we can put that out there and we can inform our attendees, this is what we are recommending. This is why we're recommending it. This is not only for your safety and well-being, but for the safety and well-being of those employees that we have in an establishment. And as we begin to see this virus, how it reacts or how it doesn't react, then we'll be able to say, do we feel comfortable being able to expand those distances or decrease those distances at this point in time? I don't think any of us are under the illusion that we're going to be able to go back into a room anytime soon with large scale conferences. but there will be a formula that we've already begun to see people talk about and develop to say, this is what we think is safe at this point in time, whether it's the X number of square feet per person in an expo or in a dining establishment or, you know, in a meeting room. That's what we're going to be looking at. And those are going to have to be fluid and changing as we learn and find out more information from the healthcare providers.
Absolutely, and all good points. Debbie, Tim, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think if I can add one other piece, you know, we all go on site inspections and preview the venues prior to the event. And the question we always ask is, what can this fit in this set, and how can this fit in this arrangement? And every hotel and most venues have a capacity guide that shows you what you can do within the fire marshal limitations. I think that's all out the window right now. I think we'll have to have a new capacity guide and new understandings of what we can and cannot do in a room. Once again, the venue will have to guide us and lead us to the new reality of capacities and the new reality of sets. And in my opinion, it will be a new reality and a reality that, again, we can't take for granted. So site inspections will be different, and discovery calls and understanding the venues will be different in the beginning until we fully understand the guidelines.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in addition to the capacity, and I think that that's going to be a collaborative conversation, stakeholders and planners, as well as hotels and venues, you know, all together having that conversation. I think in addition to the capacity, we're going to have to look at flow differently, see how impact of you know, people gathering in areas, what that looks like, how we're directing people, whether that's in you know, a check-in place, an entrance or exit place, or even to get into, you know, restaurants. I think we're all going to be looking at that differently and to ensure that we've put the health and safety as the top priority for, you know, for the guidance that we have and the amount of people that we are executing with.
Now, I've been peeking at the questions that everyone's been asking, and kind of part of this question, I think, may answer a few of these. With regard to food and beverage service, how do you see that changing? This is up for anyone.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I mean, with regard to food and beverage, I mean, I think that we're seeing that at least in Las Vegas already, that, you know, the buffet as we knew it is gone at this point in time. That's not going to happen. I think the other thing that we're going to see is that we're going to have to work with our hotel partners in helping them develop what's the safest and best way to be able to still service the guest, what's the best way to be able to put a meal out there for someone. There are people that are reticent. They don't like those grab and go stations, but grab and go stations in the environment that we're in seem to be the best vehicle to be able to get that out there in a safe manner for people. So I think that, you know, to what Deb and Tim had spoken about earlier, this is going to be a collaboration between all of the stakeholders that are involved, saying, what are we going to be able to do? Is the perception that we have to have, you know, gloved employees and masked employees, you know, there serving food? Do we need to make sure that, you know, there's extra attention that's paid now to sanitation in between, you know, every seating and everything that's going on? Absolutely. All of those things are going to come into play. I mean, when you look at food and beverage, you know, a typical round of 10, I don't think that we're going to be seeing typical rounds of 10 for quite some time. You know, what's the comfort level, not only, you know, from the attendee standpoint, but from everybody who's serving environment, as far as how closely can we sit people that we still feel comfortable, and from a food and service standpoint.
That's great, Lenny. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tim and Deb. You know, as we move on and check out some of these venues, there's been a lot of talk about indoor venues versus outdoor venues. Debbie, this question is for you. How will events differ from indoor versus outdoor?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that a lot of, you know, there's a lot of eyes on this because there is a little bit of a perceived perception that outdoor, you know, might be safer because you have, you know, a different air circulation offering, obviously. But the reality is that from a health and safety standpoint, there's still guidelines and measures that have to be implemented. You still are looking at social distancing. You're still looking at how people are gathering. And I would say for outside, you'd still have to come into what your criteria is going to be in where people are sitting and how distance they are. And if you're allowing it as a reception rather than a sit down, what does that look like? We've already started to see the trends when we've opened retail and opened restaurants on how people are distanced, and does that look like we're putting placement on the ground of saying here's the gathering spot, distance appropriately so that people can be and enjoying the reception or an event, but still feeling like they are safely distanced from other attendees, and allowing that for everybody. I think that the attendee persona is going to be top of mind to ensure that diligence was taken into consideration to allow the health and safety measures to be in place, and that the people that are there, the attendees that are around, feel like those protocols are there. And what does that look like in terms of, is that designated seating areas or, or designated spots to say we need to be able to put people here. And I think the same trends that we're seeing inside where, just talking about food and beverage, where at first we may not see bar service immediately because of the lack of ability to allow the congregation of people and maybe not have them as distance. And we're looking at servicing people with, drinks and food and things like that. I think that that's all it's gonna be consistent outside as well.
Yeah, that's great. And, Lenny, I know you mentioned yesterday in terms of an outdoor venue, in terms of the amount of touch points that may be reduced. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think to Deb's point too, I will elaborate on that, but I think the other thing is that we can put all of these measures in place and we can strongly encourage and suggest it, but then there's always going to be that factor of the willingness for people to participate and to do that. We see both sides of this that are going on, that there are some people that will go outside if they go outside and they'll be masked up and gloved up, and then you'll see others who are not. So there's the question of how can you politely police and enforce that both indoors and outdoors for people. I mean, I think indoors it seems a little more obvious that you're able to police that. Outdoors becomes a question and becomes a challenge for everyone. I think one of the things that we chatted about yesterday, and Deb just alluded to it, there are in certain parks and in certain places around the world already, beaches, that they're beginning to delineate and say, we're breaking this up and we're gridding it out to be, at least 6 foot away from each other, so that it's already built into the environment. It's been designed that way so that we know that we want to keep people apart. But getting them to agree to it is the harder part of that equation.
Thank you, Lenny. And looking at some of the questions there, people are asking about how do you enforce it versus the attendees, and I think you hit it right on the head that it's going to be difficult to. Tim, this next question is for you. Most of the challenges that the events industry has faced before has always been financially based, but the events industry always finds a way to add perceived value to the clients and attendees both. How does this compare to the health crisis we face today?
Well, I think we're going to have a new budget, right? And I think one of the line items will be COVID-19. And we kind of smile and kid about it, but already as we begin to plan future events, in the past, there was a security budget line in events, especially big, larger corporate events. But now I think there'll be an exaggerated concentration to what the dollars and cents are needed to put together a show in the new reality. And, the venues are going to have to definitely add costs, as they'll have sanitation programs, they'll have to have additional staff to serve and accommodate groups. There's no doubt about it. So how will they absorb and translate that cost? And then on the planner side, there'll be additional cost and additional communication, which is cost. And, PPE items and multiple other things that we'll have to now concentrate on, that will come down to dollars and cents. And I also believe that when we come back to live meetings, we'll continue to have a virtual component to that. And it will be a dual meeting, because in the beginning, there's simply going to be, in my opinion, a population that will not attend live meetings for a while, but they'll still want to be included. So you'll need to plan the live meeting and the virtual component to that live meeting right alongside of it. So that will be an additional cost. And I think that's going to continue for some time, where you'll have that. So there's many things that we'll have to look at. I don't think necessarily a huge cost, but it will be a cost. And I think it's something that everybody that I've talked to is already talking about it and planning for there to be additional cost.
That's a really good point about the virtual aspect, because and Debbie, I believe you mentioned this yesterday in terms of there's two groups of people that you seem to see out there. Excuse me. You have one that are just gung ho, ready to just meet everybody and go back to the way we were, and then the ones that are more cautious. Can you give us your thoughts about the types of groups you see and also the virtual events in the future?
Absolutely, and as Tim mentioned, I mean, a virtual content, aspect of the content being available will be there. You have people that are chomping at the bit. They're ready. They want to let them free. Whatever that means to them. Go to a restaurant or go to a casino or go to an event, and then you have people that are concerned, and rightfully so. They're taking different measurements into place. So how do you accommodate both audiences? And I think Tim's absolutely right. These meetings that are and events that are coming back, so that nobody's left out, or that you can expand the outreach, that there's a digital component that's going to take place virtually. And that's, for one, that could mean, from a travel impact, people can't get here. So we don't want them to not be able to participate or, miss an opportunity. And then we also need to take in consideration that people may not be comfortable. And that's a budget line item, not only in the technology of it, but data security. And what does that look like, for meetings going forward? I think that the landscape lends itself to the ability to meet live, and obviously we want that to come back sooner rather than later. And there is a reality. It's gonna take a little while for the larger groups to be able to come back. But how can we do that even in an unconventional way? We have, if we have 1,000 people coming, but we're dividing them in 5 rooms, and we're either showing the same content displayed throughout all the rooms, or we're rotating content and things like that. I think there's going to have to be a little bit of creativity here in how we do that, so that people are comfortable both in person, and then how are we still allowing for an outreach in a digital and virtual capacity as well.
If I can jump in, I want to piggyback on that. I think that Deb touched on a great point, as did Tim. I think that it's us as an industry framing the conversations with those customers that safety and it's a value to them. This is why it's valuable to them. These are the procedures that we're putting in place. Just like we've done this with so many other products and services that we've offered in the past, is selling them on the value of why this is important to them, why it's important for the employees that are coming, the attendees that are coming, that we've thought through all of this so that we can all feel safe coming back together when those large groups do begin, emerging.
Lenny, you definitely are a fortune teller. That was the next question. How'd you know? In terms of no, before we went into COVID shutdown, we saw big events, big companies rather, big conferences from Google and Microsoft kind of immediately cancel their 2020 conferences that triggered other smaller conferences to do. And part of the questions people are asking, what can we do to be part of the solution here? To make sure that these bigger events come back to physical venues versus being online. And Tim, I'll bring it to you first, and then Debbie and Lenny, please weigh in.
Well, first and foremost, we have to communicate safety. And I think, the reason that the large corporate events canceled was fear of safety for their attendees, correct? I mean, that's the reason why everyone's canceling, is that the unknown and safety. So if we can put together the guidelines with the hotel venues and provide a translation of safety, that people can go to an event and feel safe and feel that there's a value with that, and in my opinion, showcase the model of a successful event, you'll start to see these large corporate events come back. And once the large corporate events come back, I think everyone follows suit. In the beginning, it will be smaller events simply because that will be the guidelines, right? They're not going to open the doors to 10,000, 50,000 person shows. But what we can do in the small events and tweak and adjust and revise that can be applicable to the larger events. And then I believe and hope that the large events will take hold and start to return. And that's the goal. The goal is to have the larger events come back, and with obviously safety as the #1 concern.
That's great. Debbie, Lenny?
Sure. So I'm agreeing 100% with Tim that, demonstrating employee safety, demonstrating that, our concern for guest safety and putting in the hygienic, protocols that need to be in place so that people can begin believing, yes, this is okay. I feel more comfortable. I think that that's the first step. I think to Deb's point earlier, yes, the virtual world is where we are at the moment, and people are embracing that because they have no choice but to, at this moment, embrace it until such time that they begin to feel comfortable that those things have been put in place to allow large gatherings to come. I think even when that does occur, the virtual / hybrid is never going to go away, because there's always going to be an element of people at this point in time that are going to maybe have that second thought of, do I really want to? Do I feel comfortable going? Do I really need to go? So I think now is the time where, within our industry, we're seeing people pivot to say, how do we successfully accomplish both? How do we get people to continue to engage virtually? How do we get them to come back to the physical environment? And then from there, how do we begin to sell them on the idea that they can continue in the future with these hybrid style events that can be 100% on brand, on message for them, so that they can reach even a larger audience than arguably any venue was able to hold for them in the past. So I think that those are all part of these conversations that are going to come out of this, as far as what does the future and the new normal look like, is all of those things combined.
And I think this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a positive opportunity. It's an opportunity to widen your audience, right, with a live show in conjunction with a virtual element. Like Lenny said, there is a population, in my opinion, humble opinion, that will never really return to events, especially on the international side. So having that virtual piece opens it up to a wider range of audience. And in my opinion, this is a positive. A lot of people didn't want to do virtual because there's so much going into the live event, and what was the necessity of having this virtual piece. And I think we all understand here, because we've all been on these webinars or seen webinars, that the virtual piece is here. And I completely agree with Lenny, it's here to stay in some fashion for a very long time.
Thanks for unmuting me. I agree. I completely agree, Tim and Lenny. And I think in addition to that, health and safety that's the utmost importance. And it's a common initiative. The venues, the hotels, the event organizers, the attendees, they all have that common goal. We have to accomplish that first and foremost and show it. And I think Las Vegas has done a phenomenal job preparing for that. We're ready with open arms for people, to be able to start coming in the appropriate, doses of people to come, both as, the city as a whole and as our local properties have begun to do so and put in their own procedures and then publicize them so that groups know that they're in place. I agree, with Tim. I think that people need to be able to see how we can achieve this, knowing how important health and safety is. How can we achieve everybody's goals? I mean, to me, to say that people are ready to meet live and in person, that goes without saying. You get far more accomplished that way. You'll never be able to replace that virtually. You're not going to replace that connection, the interaction, the education you get from face to face. So it's just a matter of us staying relevant, top of mind, top of market to our customers, to know that Vegas will be ready when the time is right. And we've done everything that we possibly can to put in the right measures, the right protocols. Everybody's comfortable with it, and it's proven to be successful. I think doing it in the small groups, as the guidelines are pushing us to do so, of course, to show this is how it will work in these small groups. Here's how we can expand it beyond that, to show that it is a viable option to be able to meet in person and still be safe. And I think that that's the most important for attendees to feel like this is a good idea for them to come back.
Thank you, Debbie, Tim, Lenny. You guys have been tremendous in answering these questions. We've had a ton of questions come in, and I've been trying to eye them so that I can pick out the best ones. There have been a ton of questions specifically on small group gatherings. Using your crystal ball, And again, I defer to anyone to go back to the official guidelines to look at it. But looking at your crystal ball, what size of gatherings do you think are going to come first? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 20? What are your thoughts?
I'll jump first because I'm going to say that, one, we're hearing, at least here in Las Vegas, that it's at 250 is the max at the moment. I can see easily that there will be groups that will, that will feel comfortable, that we have ample space to be able to demonstrate to them how that can be done successfully. I'm of the school that I believe we have ample space to be able to demonstrate to groups far larger than that how it can be done successfully. But that's just a matter of the venues and, of course, the jurisdictions here accepting those, those recommendations that we as an industry have to put out there and say, this is how we can do it and make it safe for everyone.
We're fortunate in Las Vegas. We have some huge facilities and venues. So 250 is where we're at, but hopefully not for long. And I think once we show a model of success for 250 and how it can be applicable to the larger groups, that will open up and expand and increase. I just think we have to be successful at 250. It's baby steps. Of course, the government and the health officials are going to dictate that, but I'll start with 250 and with the anticipation that that's not something that's going to last for long.
Great. Thank you, Tim and Lenny. This next question is asking about specifically on venues and capacity and pricing. This person's asking, how do you think pricing will change for spaces? Venues that once held 300 people may now be cut in half. Will the pricing have to reflect the lower capacity, although the pricing was originally set for higher capacity? Anybody take this one?
Yeah. That's going to be a tricky one because, again, people, we know what in hotels and in establishments, what a break-even point is in order for people to be successful in that venue, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a hotel, convention center. So, pricing, if anything, is going to, in my opinion, you're going to have to still stay firm and consistent, knowing that costs are increasing. I mean, Tim spoke to this early on. I don't think there's a question in anybody's mind that this is going to cost operators a lot more money to have to be able to produce. Look at the hours that are going in for the additional cleaning, sanitation, everything that has to be done. So I think it's kind of a difficult position to be in, and that goes back to both Deb and Tim mentioned this earlier, that we have to have these conversations with our customers, with our clients, to help educate them as to why this is costing what it's costing and what they're getting, the value that they're getting out of it.
That's a good question. Actually, I want to fold in one other one. And Debbie, I saw that you wanted to jump in, so please do. Who do you see absorbing the cost of that then? One of the questions specifically asks, who do you see absorbing the cost for the actual sanitizing teams and supplies? Debbie?
Well, I can speak to that as well too. I mean, I think there's going to be a mutual line here. I think that the onus on a venue or a space, I mean, they're going to have to do their due diligence to be able to operate. I think that that's an increased cost to be able to execute any event. There's, that's going to become a new fixed cost. I think additional costs, based on a flow of event might come into play to say, if you're going to rotate out, stations or waves of people or things like that, and then we need to bring in any venue needs to bring in another wave of a sanitation measure, that might be something that's passed on. But I think that we're all looking at now, whether it's an office building, a standalone venue, or casino, there's increased cost to be able to maintain the sanitation level that will be required.
Well, I think this is something that everyone's watching very closely because it's the elephant in the room. There is going to be additional costs on both sides. Who's going to absorb those costs? How are those costs going to be translated? Is there going to be a COVID-19 fee? And I say that with a half a smile. It may not be named that, but what is the next? How are we going to translate these additional costs? And Lenny's absolutely correct. It has to be communicated in the collaboration between the venues. We both need each other. So it's a good conversation to have and understand how those costs can be absorbed by both sides where it's applicable and and the responsibility is there, but not all on the planner side. So that makes that budget just that much more difficult. You know, after we had issues years back with security, many of the venues created a security fee, so to speak, and planners had to start paying for additional security. The hotel supplied that, or the vendor supplied that, but that fee was translated onto the planner. And most of us absorbed that because we want a safe show. Will this be the same environment? That has not been determined. I haven't seen it been determined anywhere that I've looked, and that's definitely a big question moving forward, though.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. You know, now with all the new procedures and as we await new guidelines, people are starting to rethink all kind of your basic things that we took for granted. This question addresses specifically talking. Can you discuss alternatives to passing things out, such as registration items, swag bags, anything that you would traditionally be putting out on a registration table? How does that change, and what would you say would be a best practice to start looking into?
I mean, some of the trends I've started to see in terms of materials is not, physical distribution. Obviously in this time period that we've been at home for the last few months, it's all been digitally transmitted in terms of agendas or, working materials. I think we'll still see that even in person, reducing the need to print. But I think in terms of swag bags and things, I don't necessarily think those are going away, because I think that there's a component of the people that we're going to want to address and accommodate who aren't physically there. It just may not be a registration like, style where you're having people in line to get it. Maybe it's delivered to the rooms or things like that. And then we could also then deliver to people's homes, the people that are, these curated event boxes and swag to your home kind of mentality that are sent to them. But I think that would also go along with how we're going to look at registration and other other hospitality like desks and things like that. There might be a virtual waiting line, waiting room where we don't have people that are waiting in line. I think that there's going to be a technology component that we're all going to see some creativity come out of how can we be more efficient, obviously with health in mind and protocols in mind. But I think that would go along with some of the things that we're distributing. It might just be a different way to get it to them.
If I can jump in, I'm going to say that I agree with Deb's point in particular too, is that I think we're going to see a lot more of this done sent to the attendee, because I think that we're going to see less room drops than we've ever seen before, because there's going to be that, do we want somebody actually even going into a guest's room or anything like that? So I think that we're going to find a way that planners may say, let me put my resources into the physical event at this point. Some of those charges that are, we're going to have to pay for other things now that's going on, and the swag portion becomes quote unquote the follow up afterwards. As opposed to picking it up at a particular counter or having somebody, go into your room an additional time that's not necessary.
Thank you. You mentioned technology, Debbie, in your answer, and this question in particular is asking, what are the trends in technology being put in place to provide virtual large conferences that you see?
Well, I think a less known one is probably first and foremost is security. I think that was widely underestimated in terms of what needs to be put into place in order for people to be able to access information in multiple virtual locations. So I think that that's going to be needing to be addressed more substantially than we have in the past. And I think that in addition to, you have to be able to curate, if you're going to do something digitally or you're mirroring a live event and then doing it digital, how can you curate that experience so it feels more authentic to what you would have experienced in person? And it's very different to go, from an educational or webinar series where you're listening to one person or gathering one bit of information versus what a virtual component of a waiting room would look like, or a lobby, and then you're going to a trade show and then you're getting to interact with individual brands and things like that. If we're going to try to create a dual experience, both live and in person, and also virtual, I think that we're going to up the ante on what that looks like on a virtual standpoint, or it's not going to be a comparable experience. So I think we're going to have to be very creative in what that looks like. And same in opportunities of curating entertainment offerings that you could both, it's not just about the broadcast element. That's something that's done now, broadcasting live entertainment that you could then stream, but it might be a virtual component that you can then give your attendees who are at home. Might be different than what they see in person, and it could be a rotating entertainment affair or something of that sort. I think we're going to have to be a little bit more outside the box there. I think especially the last few months when people have joined in to virtual, they've joined into virtual events and conferences, I think now the expectation is going to be raised. I think the expectation is going to be, how can we go above and beyond that so people feel like they're still getting the same experience that they would get in person.
Thank you, Debbie. This one's a little bit of a tough question, but I want to ask all three of you because you were in the events industry during the 2008 recession. This one in particular is asking, what do you foresee? Can you predict what the budgets will look like for overall events? Will it match 2008 recession budgets?
Well, it's going to be increased for sure. And again, until we understand the guidelines, we're held hostage right now by not understanding the guidelines. And I say that with peace and love, but it's the reality. Until we really fully understand what we cannot and can and cannot do, we don't fully understand what our budget line items will be. But one thing that I think we all can understand without knowing the guidelines is that they will increase. So, the component, there'll be more efforts put into shows. And I'm talking until we get this thing under control, obviously. But there'll be more effort put into the shows, therefore, more money spent. I don't know how it could go backwards. I can't see any type of understanding on how it could go backwards, because we are now adding another layer of preparation and execution.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
budgets will increase. Oh, sorry, Deb, didn't mean to step on that. Budgets will increase. There's no question. It's not gonna go backwards. I think that we're underestimating. The companies also understand that there will be increased costs. There will be additional line items that they never thought of before that are going to have to be included. And so it's the fact of doing business. It's going to happen. It's going to evolve, and it's on us once again to work with them to explain and educate them on why we're putting this in place and what it does and how it continues to support their efforts for these live functions. Sorry, Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the non-negotiables, and the increase, obviously increased protection and PPE and security and all of that. I mean, those are going to be what's going to largely take up the increased budget, just to be the cost of doing business to be able to execute. I think as event curators and planners and us, suppliers, I think we should be prepared for the non-negotiable to be what it is. But in order to put on this, and create an experience, our dollars might be stretched. I think it might be kind of back to the recession. How can we be creative with the dollar? What's the perceived value in that? I think that that's going to be a separate budget talk than things that are just absolutely non-negotiable. The cost of doing an event now will increase to be able to be successful. But some of the other entities that we provide, we might be tasked, big task at hand. How can we be creative, stretching a dollar, because the event dollar may not change in terms of enhancements, from that standpoint, and it won't be what the priority of the spend is, once we check the boxes of things that are going to be a higher priority, the non-negotiables of health and safety protocols.
And and if I can, I'm sorry to jump back in, but I think that this is it's a tangent to that. It follows up, is that it's also the venues and for planners involved to understand too that the turn times for facilities, they're going to increase as well, because it's going to take us now far longer to prep that facility for somebody that's coming in than maybe it has traditionally in the past, if we're instituting new protocols for cleaning and disinfecting in between groups. And so some of those, oh my gosh, you only have 2 hours to get out because we need to flip the room, those, maybe gratefully we'll see the day of the past.
That's a really good point. We have time for one final question. I think it's a pretty good one when we're talking about the extra things to be watching for in a contract and whatnot. This question in particular says, what do you think the pushback is going to look like when you need more bandwidth to execute a hybrid event and that will cost more?
I'm just
Can
trying
you
to.
repeat that, Will? I'm not sure I understand.
Of course. So in other words, I believe this person is asking, executing a hybrid event is going to cost more because it's going to require more bandwidth, not just from a personnel standpoint, but potentially even a technology standpoint for the attendee and also for the person putting it on. What do you expect are going to be some of the things that people push back on from experiencing a hybrid event? So hopefully, to the person that asked that question, hopefully that's what you were looking for.
I'll jump first and then I'll defer to but I would say this, I'm not sure that putting on a hybrid event is really going to cost them substantially more. I mean, I think of it this way. Those of us that have operated for years in the design world, we're used to working virtually. In fact, before we put something into a customer, we've already rendered that space out in, you know, in an electronic environment to begin with. So the leap for us to be able to say, now we're not only going to show you these pretty renderings and execute it live in person, but also then deliver it to you for those people that are going to be, you know, attending remotely. That's not that far of a stretch because some of the work's already being done. So I think it's just a matter of having those conversations and educating them that this is what we're already doing to create your environments and your events before it becomes, you know, bricks and mortars and things in the room. This is what we're doing virtually already, and now it's just the next phase is to delivering that content out to people. So I don't think it's going to be that exponentially more expensive, the way that question was worded.
And I think in terms of it being live, you know, in a space, in a ballroom or in a venue, I think on the flip side, you know, transparency will be key. I think there might be some perceived value on seeing the additional servers or busters seem to be able to clear different protocols that are put in place. I mean, that might be a requirement of an organization, of a business to be able to do an event. And I think that ensuring that those measures are in place, I think there might be some understanding of why an increased cost would be associated to a, you know, increased labor, you know, whether that's in the event itself or in the preparation for the event. I think that, you know, Lenny had a good point. You know, we're all very used to the flip of spaces. That may not be what we see, certainly not for the foreseeable future, to allow disinfectant and sanitation to take its course. And there might be additional costs associated to that people are willing to pay to be able to show to their stakeholders that they've done all of the due diligence needed to be safe.
It's a really good point. Debbie, Lenny, Tim, we're at our time. I wanted to thank you so much for all of your insights in this. All three of you have been remarkable through this process. There's been a ton of questions. We're going to do our best to copy and paste them onto a Word doc and send them over to the people that have asked. I think we had over 80 questions get submitted. Definitely, there's a lot of talk here. Thank you so much, Debbie Felker. Thank you, Tim Glanzer. Thank you, Lenny Tellerico. Thank you, everyone that attended. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.